What if the most demanding patron you ever served was also the architect of your destiny? For one sommelier, a single sentence spoken in a language she wasn't supposed to know uncorked a future beyond her wildest imaginings. This isn't a vintage fairy tale. It's a story steeped in the rich complexity of New York City, where a moment of quiet rebellion in a bustling Michelin-starred restaurant caught the attention of a man who didn't just see a server. He saw an uncelebrated vintage waiting to be discovered. It's a narrative woven with the threads of a cryptic note, a private jet ticket, and a challenge so exhilarating it could either shatter her or elevate her to the grand crew she was always destined to be. The scent of aged oak, delicate truffle, and the faint, persistent tang of polish on antique silverware was the familiar aroma of Clara Vining's life. It clung to her perfectly pressed black uniform, the tailored lines of her sommelier's jacket, and the subtle weariness around her 32-year-old eyes. She worked at Le Clair de Lune, a revered French restaurant in Manhattan's Upper West Side, a place that, like its name, promised celestial elegance and frequently delivered demanding patrons. It boasted hand-blown Venetian chandeliers that shimmered like captured starlight and velvet banquettes so plush they felt like sinking into a cloud. It was a gilded cage for the city's aspiring chefs, ambitious managers, and in Clara's case, a connoisseur of forgotten flavors. Each evening, she would pin back her auburn hair, the strands catching the restaurant's soft light, and arrange a smile that was impeccable, yet rarely reached the depths of her gaze. She was exceptional at her job, knowledgeable, poised, and almost invisible, the perfect sommelier. No one swirling their Bordeaux or complaining about the bouquet of their Chardonnay would ever guess that Clara could distinguish between one's 17th century Burgundian terroir variations or passionately debate the economic impact of phylloxera on European vineyards. No one knew that 8 years ago she had been a rising star at the prestigious École des Vins et Spiritueux in Bordeaux, living a life painted in the vibrant hues of her viticultural dreams. Then came the devastating news. Her family's small, beloved vineyard in Sonoma, a legacy handed down for generations, was facing ruin. A catastrophic wildfire, an uninsured loss, and a mountain of impossible debt. Her dream evaporated like morning mist. She flew home, leaving behind the sun-drenched hills of France for the shadowed skyscrapers of a tiny studio apartment she now shared with her elderly, ailing father in Queens. Bordeaux became a phantom, a painful whisper of a life that belonged to someone else. Table 14, Clara. They need your expertise with the 82 Margaux. And quickly, hissed Jean-Luc, the maître d', his voice a sharp, urgent whisper over the clinking of crystal and hushed murmurs. Jean-Luc, with his slicked-back hair and perpetually disapproving frown, was a tyrant of timing and decorum, constantly reminding Clara that her peasant background needed to be meticulously disguised. Clara grabbed the heavy silver wine coaster, the chill of it a stark contrast to the burning resentment she often felt. On it, Jean-Luc! She moved through the opulent dining room with an innate elegance, weaving between linen-draped tables and deferential junior staff. Table 14 was her current ordeal. Mr. Alistair Finch, a notoriously pompous investment banker in his late 50s, notorious for his theatrical displays of wealth and his disdain for anyone he deemed service staff. He had already sent back a bottle of perfectly chilled champagne because, in his words, the bubbles lacked effervescence, a grave insult to my palate. He was trying desperately to impress his much younger, equally unimpressed date, Ms. Veronica Hayes, a socialite with a permanent look of boredom etched on her flawless face. And make sure the Margaux is decanted precisely 45 minutes before serving, he'd ordered earlier, tapping his designer watch with an imperious finger. Not 40, not 50. If it's too young, I'm sending it back. If it's too old, I'm sending it back. Understood, my dear? Clara had just smiled, a flicker of ice in her eyes. Perfectly clear, sir. As she navigated the evening's relentless demands, her gaze briefly swept the room. In the far corner booth, partially obscured by a towering floral arrangement, a man sat alone. He was strikingly different from the usual Le Clair de Lune clientele. He wasn't flaunting his phone, nor was he attempting to be seen. He was simply observing, He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, charcoal gray, with a silk tie the color of a stormy sky. There was no flashy watch, no ostentatious display of wealth, but the cut of his clothes and the quiet intensity in his gaze spoke of a world beyond mere affluence. He nursed a single glass of water with a slice of lemon, and every time she passed, she felt his observant eyes on her. It wasn't intrusive, just intensely analytical. She'd pegged him as an intellectual, perhaps a celebrated author or a discreet art collector. He had an air of quiet contemplation that belied the boisterous luxury around him. "Table 8 needs a fresh bottle of San Pellegrino," Jean-Luc whispered, materializing at her side like a phantom, his voice laced with his usual, barely concealed contempt. "And Mr. Finch is asking for you again. He says the ambient temperature of the room is affecting the tannins of his 82. He says it's a disgrace to the vintage." Clara sighed, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor running through her. "Of course he does. I'll see to it." It was just another Friday night, a relentless ballet of pouring, serving, and absorbing the casual condescension of people who had never known what it felt like to choose between buying medicine for a sick parent and keeping the lights on. She moved toward Finch's table, her tray of sparkling water bottles balanced perfectly, unaware that this mundane, soul-crushing Friday was about to shatter her life into a million glittering pieces and then reforge it anew. The man in the corner took a slow sip of his water, his gaze following her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He wasn't just watching a sommelier, he was waiting. The heavy gilded door of Le Clair de Lune chimed softly, announcing a new arrival. An elderly woman, looking utterly bewildered and out of place, stepped inside. She clutched a large worn handbag, her eyes wide and scanning the opulent room as if she'd stumbled into a royal ball by accident. Her clothes were elegant but subtly dated, a classic tweed coat over a simple silk dress, suggesting a European tourist who had taken a wrong turn off Fifth Avenue. She approached the host stand where a new, inexperienced host, a nervous young man named Ethan, was struggling to manage the reservation book. "Un table? S'il vous plaît?" she asked, her English heavily accented and uncertain. Ethan stared at her blankly. "A what, ma'am?" "For one." "Un table? S'il vous plaît?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Yeah, just a moment," Ethan mumbled, not looking up from his tablet. The woman waited, looking increasingly distressed. She tried again, this time in her native tongue, a rapid-fire stream of French, explaining she was lost, that her taxi had dropped her at the wrong address, and she was supposed to meet her niece at a different restaurant across town. Her phone battery was dead, and she was growing increasingly anxious. Ethan just shook his head. "Sorry, lady, I don't speak, whatever that is." "Spanish?" From his table, Mr. Finch let out a loud, theatrical sigh, loud enough to make heads turn. "Oh, for heaven's sake, let a man of culture handle this." He pushed his chair back with a flourish and stood up, puffing out his chest as he approached the woman. "Bonjour, madame," he said, his accent a grotesque caricature, mangling the beautiful language. I can help you. You, want a table?" The French woman just looked more confused, her brow furrowed with a mix of fear and bewilderment. Clara, who was delivering the decanted Margot to a nearby table, felt a hot flush of second-hand embarrassment and a familiar surge of anger. It was painful to listen to. Finch was butchering the language, turning its melodic beauty into a clumsy, arrogant assault on the ears. "Voulez-vous, sit down?" he continued, gesturing wildly at an empty table with a condescending smirk. Clara couldn't stand it anymore. It was more than just his terrible French. It was his arrogance, his smug satisfaction in making a spectacle of this poor, lost woman. It was the same condescension he'd shown her and countless other service staff all evening. Something inside her, the part of her that remembered walking through ancient Bordeaux vineyards and debating philosophical texts in flawless French, finally snapped. She placed the wine on the table with a soft thud, straightened her sommelier's jacket, and approached the elderly woman. The man in the corner booth, Alistair Vance, leaned forward ever so slightly. His glass of water paused halfway to his lips. Clara looked at the woman and smiled gently, her smile finally reaching her eyes. Then she spoke. The voice that came out was not the polite, weary voice of a New York sommelier. It was a voice from another life, a voice that was as smooth and clear as the finest vintage, carrying the subtle, educated cadence of Parisian French. Madame, she began, her Bordeaux accent flawless and pure. Pardonnez-moi pour l'interruption. Cet homme ne vous comprend pas. Puis-je vous aider? Vous semblez perdu. Madame, forgive me for the interruption. This man doesn't understand you. May I help you? You seem lost. The room seemed to fall silent around their small group. Finch's jaw went slack, his face a sudden mottled red. His date stared at Clara with wide, disbelieving eyes. Jean-Luc peeked out from the kitchen entrance, his usual sneer replaced by a look of utter astonishment. The French woman's face, however, lit up with profound relief. "Oh mon Dieu, oui!" she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest. She launched into her story again, but this time the words found a safe harbor, understood, and embraced. She explained her confusion about the restaurant's address, her dead phone, her worry about her niece leaving without her. Clara listened patiently, nodding and offering reassuring words. "Madame Dubois," she said soothingly, learning the woman's name. "Ne vous inquiétez pas, madame. Tout ira bien. Don't you worry, madame. Everything will be all right." She turned to Ethan. "Ethan, could you please seat Madame Dubois at table 6, away from the draft, and bring her a glass of still water and a menu?" Then she turned back to the woman. "Please, have a seat. Let me use my phone to call your niece. What is her name and number?" While Madame Dubois fumbled in her purse for a scrap of paper with the contact details, Clara turned to face Mr. Finch. His face was a thunderous shade of crimson, a volatile mixture of fury and utter humiliation. "If you'll excuse me, sir," Clara said, her voice reverting to its polite, professional tone, "I'll ensure your Margot is served at the ideal temperature." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked away, leaving him standing there, utterly deflated, his grand display of culture having backfired spectacularly. She retrieved her phone from her locker, made a quick call, and sorted out Madame Dubois' predicament. Her niece was just a few blocks away at a different establishment and would come to collect her. Clara gave the woman clear written directions on a Le Clair de Lune napkin to a nearby taxi stand and ensured Ethan would call a cab for her. Madame Dubois was effusive in her gratitude, pressing a crumpled $50 bill into Clara's hand, which Clara gently refused. "Bon voyage, madame. C'est un plaisir. Have a safe evening." As Madame Dubois left, a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over Clara. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. She had forgotten what that felt like. She went to clear Finch's table, expecting him to be gone. He was, but he'd left a measly $5 tip on a $500 bill, his final petty act of defiance. She wasn't surprised. What did surprise her was that the man in the corner booth was also getting up to leave. He caught her eye as he slid on a tailored navy blue overcoat. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look of profound appraisal in his eyes. He left a crisp $100 bill on his table for a single glass of water and walked out without a word. Clara pocketed the generous tip, feeling a small thrill of victory. She thought that was the end of it, a brief, satisfying moment of rebellion in an otherwise monotonous existence. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine. The restaurant emptied out, the frantic energy of the dinner rush replaced by the quiet hum of the late evening. Clara refilled water pitchers, polished wine glasses, and tried not to think about Mr. Finch's sneer or the surprising weight of the quiet man's gaze. She was just Clara, the sommelier. Then the flicker of the forgotten Bordeaux student that had been rekindled was just that, a flicker. When her shift finally ended at 11:00 p.m., she felt the familiar ache in her feet in the deeper ache in her soul. She slung her worn leather bag over her shoulder and headed for the staff exit. "Vining," she turned. It was Jean-Luc, wiping his hands on a pristine white towel. He was holding something, a sleek, black envelope. "The quiet guy," he grunted, a flicker of something resembling confusion in his usually disdainful eyes. "The one in the corner booth. He came back a few minutes ago, said he forgot to give this to you. Told me to make sure you got it personally." Clara frowned, taking the envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock, unlike anything she'd ever held. There was no name on it, no address, just a simple, elegant silver seal holding it closed. The stylized image of an ancient Roman coin, depicting a cluster of grapes. Weird, right? Jean-Luc grunted, adjusting his tie. Looked like a spy or something. Anyway, see you tomorrow, Vining. Clara murmured her thanks and slipped out into the alley. The evening air was cool against her flushed skin. Leaning against the brick wall under the dim glow of a security light, she broke the seal. Her fingers trembled slightly. Inside were two items. The first was a business card, as thick and black as the envelope. The silver grape crest was embossed at the top. Below it, in minimalist silver lettering, were a name and a title. Alistair Vance, CEO, Vance Global Ventures. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Vance Global Ventures wasn't just some investment firm. It was a global titan, a behemoth in venture capital, luxury brand acquisitions, and cutting-edge biotech. Alistair Vance was a legend, a reclusive genius who had built an empire from scratch. He was a billionaire many times over, famously private and rarely photographed. That was the quiet man from the restaurant. It seemed impossible. The second item made her heart stop altogether. It was a plane ticket, or rather, a reservation confirmation for a private jet, a Bombardier Global 7500, scheduled to depart from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey the next day at 9:1 a.m. The destination, Marignac Airport, Bordeaux, France. The passenger's name, Clara Vining. Tucked into the fold of the ticket was a small handwritten note on matching black stationery. The handwriting was sharp and decisive, a bold, forward-slanting script in silver ink. Miss Vining, your talent should never be confined to serving mediocrity. A palate and a voice like yours belong in Bordeaux, not in a New York restaurant arguing over wine temperatures. A car will be waiting for you at your address tomorrow at 7 a.m. Your seat will be waiting. This is not a request. It's an opportunity. As Clara read the note, once, then twice, then a third time, her mind reeled. The alley seemed to tilt, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. This had to be a joke, an elaborate, cruel prank. Maybe Finch had set it up to mock her further. But how would he know her address? And the expense? A private jet to Bordeaux? She stumbled home in a daze, the black envelope clutched in her hand like a talisman. When she burst into her tiny queen's apartment, her father, a frail man with kind, tired eyes, was watching an old French film on their small television. "Clara, ma chérie, you're home early," he said, his voice raspy. Clara didn't speak. She just walked over and laid the contents of the envelope on the rickety coffee table. The business card, the jet ticket, the note. Her father picked up the card, his brow furrowing as he read. Vance Global Ventures. Mon Dieu. He read the note, then looked at the ticket. He looked back at Clara, his mouth agape. "Clara, what is this?" "I don't know, Papa," Clara whispered, sinking onto the worn armchair. "It's insane. He was there at the restaurant, the quiet man who left the $100 tip." Her father's initial shock quickly morphed into deep-seated suspicion, tempered by a lifetime of working hard for every penny. "A strange billionaire leaves you a private jet ticket to Bordeaux, Clara? This is every red flag in the book. This is how horror movies start. Some kind of weird fantasy. You cannot be serious." I know, Clara said, running a hand through her hair. "It's crazy, but the note, your talent should never be confined." He saw. He heard. He heard me speak French. Her father stood up, slowly pacing the tiny living room. "That's it. For all you know, this man has some bizarre motive. Clara, you don't know anything about him." "He's Alistair Vance," Clara said quietly. "He's one of the most famous businessmen in the world. He's not some random creep. Rich people can be the biggest creeps of all, ma chérie," her father shot back, his voice surprisingly firm. "And how did he get your address? That's what I want to know. That's not just observant. That's investigative. It's stalker-level stuff." The question hung in the air, heavy and unnerving. How did he know where she lived? Clara's mind raced. He must have had someone follow her or run her name through a database. The ease with which he had pierced the veil of her anonymity was terrifying. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring, a wild, dangerous hope. Bordeaux. The word alone was a physical ache in her chest. The ticket on the table wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a doorway back to the life that had been stolen from her. It was a chance. It was everything. What if it's real? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. What if it's just an opportunity, like he said? And what if it's a trap? Her father retorted, his arms crossed. You throw away your job, your life here, on the whim of a man you met for 5 seconds, for a cryptic note? Be realistic. Clara looked around the cramped apartment, at the peeling paint on the walls, the stack of overdue medical bills on the counter. She thought of her uniform hanging by the door, smelling faintly of truffle oil and cheap wine. This was her reality. It was safe, predictable, and it was slowly suffocating her. The note said, "This is not a request." It felt like a command, but also a challenge to be more than what she had become. The fear was real. Her father's warnings were logical. But the pull of Bordeaux, the intoxicating possibility of escape, was stronger. It was the most terrifying decision of her life. She looked at her father, her anchor in this difficult life. "I think I have to go," Clara said, the words tasting strange and foreign on her tongue. "I have to know." The next morning was a whirlwind of anxiety and adrenaline. Clara called Leclerc de Lune and quit, her voice shaking as she left a message for Jean-Luc. She imagined his annoyance, his casual dismissal of her as just another flaky sommelier. The thought, which would have bothered her yesterday, felt strangely liberating today. Packing was a surreal experience. What does one pack for a clandestine trip to Bordeaux offered by a reclusive billionaire? Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and a single black dress she'd owned for years. She stuffed them into her old scuffed suitcase, feeling foolish and hopelessly out of her depth. Her father watched her, a storm of worry on his face. "I ran a background check on him," he said, holding up his ancient laptop. "Or tried to. He's a ghost. No scandals, no tabloid fodder, just business articles and philanthropy announcements. He's either a saint or very, very good at hiding things." "Maybe he's just private," Clara said, trying to convince herself as much as her father. "Private people don't summon sommeliers to Bordeaux with anonymous notes, ma chérie," he shot back. "I'm serious, Clara. I've put a tracking app on your phone. Don't you dare turn it off, and I want you to check in with me every 3 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling the embassy, the FBI, the CIA. I swear to God." Clara hugged her father tightly, grateful for his fierce loyalty. "I'll be careful, I promise." At precisely 7 a.m., a sleek black Tesla Model S sedan, so silent it seemed to materialize out of thin air, pulled up to their apartment building. A chauffeur in a crisp black suit stepped out and opened the rear door. He didn't ask for her name. He simply nodded and said, "Miss Vining, we are ready when you are." The ride to Teterboro Airport was silent and smooth. Clara stared out the tinted windows at the city rushing by, feeling a profound sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. They didn't go to the main terminal, but to a private executive hangar. There, gleaming on the tarmac, was the Bombardier Global 7500. It was a vision of power and grace, larger and more imposing than she could have ever imagined. A flight attendant, with a warm, discreet smile, greeted her at the steps. "Welcome aboard, Miss Vining. Mr. Vance has arranged everything for your comfort. May I take your bag?" The interior of the jet was a study in understated luxury. Cream leather seats, polished cherry wood, and subtle silver accents that echoed the grape crest. It was more like a flying luxury apartment than an airplane. She was the only passenger. As the jet taxied down the runway, Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the point of no return. The engines roared and the plane surged forward with incredible force, pressing her back into her plush seat. Within moments they were airborne, climbing steeply into the clouds. Below her, New York City shrank. The restaurant, her apartment, her old life, all of it vanishing into a hazy memory. She was untethered, suspended between the world she knew and a future that was a complete and terrifying unknown. The flight attendant served her a lunch that was better than any meal she had ever served at Leclerc de Lune. roasted duck breast with cherry reduction, artisanal cheeses, and a glass of exquisite, perfectly chilled Sancerre that tasted like liquid sunshine on her tongue. It all felt like a dream. She half expected to wake up to the sound of her alarm clock in her tiny queen's bedroom. But 7 hours later, the dream continued. As the jet began its descent, the rolling hills of Bordeaux emerged from the late afternoon haze below. A patchwork quilt of emerald green and terracotta brown, studded with ancient chateaux. The Garonne River snaked through the landscape like a silver ribbon. A lump formed in Clara's throat. She was back. After 8 years of yearning, she was finally back. They landed at Marignac, the private airport north of the city. There was no customs line, no baggage claim chaos. She was escorted from the plane directly to another waiting car, another silent chauffeur. They drove through the familiar vine-lined roads of the Médoc, past renowned vineyards that made her heart ache with a bittersweet nostalgia. Chateau Margaux, Lafite Rothschild, Latour. It was all as beautiful as she remembered. The car, however, didn't stop at a hotel. It pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates that opened onto a private gravel drive lined with ancient cypress trees. At the end of it stood a magnificent stone bastide, a grand private country estate in the heart of a sprawling vineyard. It was a palace of honey-colored stone and terracotta tiles, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight. The chauffeur opened her door. "Welcome to Mr. Vance's Bordeaux residence, Miss Vining." Her legs felt weak as she walked up the stone steps. The massive oak door swung open before she could touch it. Standing in the grand flagstone-floored foyer was Alistair Vance. He was dressed in a simple, dark sweater and trousers, just as he had been in the restaurant. Up close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his sharp, intelligent eyes. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps in his late 40s. "Miss Vining," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. "Welcome to Bordeaux. I trust your flight was comfortable." Yes, thank you," she stammered, feeling small and out of place in the cavernous hall with its soaring ceilings and priceless antique tapestries. "Mr. Vance, I don't understand any of this." "I know," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Clarity is the purpose of your visit, but first you must be exhausted. My housekeeper will show you to your room. We can talk in the morning." He gestured, and a discreet woman in a dark uniform appeared. As Clara followed her up a sweeping stone staircase, she glanced back. Alistair Vance was watching her with the same unreadable, analytical expression he'd had in the restaurant. He hadn't explained a thing. The mystery, she realized, was only getting deeper. This was not a gift. It was a prelude. Clara awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sleeping on sheets with a thread count higher than her entire monthly income. Sunlight streamed through tall French windows, illuminating a bedroom that was larger than her entire queen's apartment. It was exquisitely decorated in shades of warm terracotta and soft cream, with a small stone fireplace and a private balcony overlooking rows of meticulously tended vines stretching to the horizon. A fresh croissant, local artisanal jams, and a cup of rich, dark coffee were already waiting for her on a small table. It was a beautiful cage, and she was still a prisoner of confusion. After dressing in her one good black dress, which now felt woefully inadequate for this setting, she made her way downstairs. She found Alistair Vance in a vast beamed study, reviewing documents on a sleek, transparent tablet. He looked up as she entered, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather armchairs opposite his large antique desk. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Clara began, her voice firmer than she expected. "Please have a seat, Mr. Vance. I appreciate the flight and the accommodations, but I need to know why I'm here. This is, abnormal, to say the least." "I appreciate that," he said, setting his tablet aside and giving her his full attention. "You are here, Miss Vining, because I am in need of a very specific skill set. A skill set I believe you possess, despite your current employment." Before he could elaborate, the study doors opened with a soft click. A woman entered, her heels clicking decisively on the polished parquet floor. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored cream pantsuit, and radiated an aura of intimidating, almost aggressive confidence. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, glossy chignon, and her eyes, the same piercing blue as Alistair's, swept over Clara with a cool, dismissive glance. "Alistair, you're late for the Chateau de Vigne preliminary meeting," she said, her voice crisp and laced with an accent that was a hybrid of Swiss finishing school and American corporate law. She stopped and looked at Clara again, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Is this her? The sommelier?" Alistair's face remained impassive. "Clara Vining, this is my sister, Vivian Vance. She's the chief legal officer of Vance Global Ventures. Vivian, this is Miss Vining." Vivian offered a smile that was as sharp and cold as a winter wind over a barren vineyard. "A pleasure, though I confess I don't quite understand the purpose of this experiment, Alistair. My brother has a peculiar penchant for seeing potential in the most unlikely of places. He seems to think that because you can speak French, you can solve a multi-billion-dollar problem for us." Clara's head was spinning. A multi-billion-dollar problem. What did they think she was? Alistair finally offered an explanation. "Vance Global Ventures is in the final stages of acquiring a company, a French company, Chateau de Vignes." Clara knew the name. Everyone in the wine world did. Chateau de Vignes was a legendary Bordeaux estate founded in the 17th century. They were famous for their exceptional Cabernet Franc, their biodynamic practices, and their fiercely independent spirit. A bastion of old-world winemaking and French heritage. "Chateau de Vigne is family-owned," Alistair continued. "It has been for 12 generations, and the current matriarch, Madame Geneviève de Vigne, is fiercely resistant to the acquisition. She is a traditionalist. She believes an American venture capital firm like ours will destroy her family's legacy and her beloved vineyard. We've sent teams of the best lawyers and negotiators in the world, and they've all failed," Vivian interjected, her tone dripping with skepticism. "They don't speak her language, and I don't mean French. They don't speak the language of terroir, of patience, of respect for centuries of tradition," Alistair elaborated. "Madame de Vigne threw our last M&A head off her estate because he suggested optimizing her grape harvest with AI. Clara was beginning to understand. "You need a translator." "No," Alistair said, leaning forward. "We have hundreds of translators. I need more than that. I need a bridge. I need someone who understands the subtlety of French wine culture, who can show respect for their heritage, but who also understands the directness and ambition of the American mindset. Someone who can navigate both worlds." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "In the restaurant, I didn't just see a sommelier speaking French. I saw a woman of intelligence and grace handle a difficult, arrogant man with poise. Then I saw her treat a lost, frightened woman with compassion and empathy, using flawless, educated French, not to show off, but to genuinely connect and help. That combination, poise under pressure, cultural fluency, and genuine empathy, is rarer than you can imagine. It cannot be taught in a business school." Vivian let out a quiet, impatient sigh. "It's a romantic notion, Alistair, a lovely story, but this is a $3.5 billion acquisition, not a social experiment. Miss Vining has no corporate experience, no background in finance or law. She served wine yesterday." The insult landed like a physical blow, but Clara held her ground. She refused to let this woman diminish her. "And what is it you do exactly when you're not a sommelier?" Vivian pressed, her eyes narrowing. "What hidden talents did my brother unearth with his little private investigation?" The question confirmed Clara's fears. He had investigated her. "I was a student," Clara said, her voice steady. "Here in Bordeaux, at the École des Vins et Spiritueux. I studied viticulture, enology, and the history of French wine. I had to leave before I could finish my degree due to a family emergency. My family vineyard was destroyed." Alistair nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. Vivian, however, looked unimpressed. "So, you're a college dropout with a defunct family business?" she stated flatly. "My sister lacks a certain subtlety, Vivian," Alistair said, shooting a warning look at his sister. "Here is the situation, Miss Vining. This is not a vacation. It is, for all intents and purposes, a job interview. The most unorthodox job interview of your life. I want you to be part of the team meeting with Madame de Vigny and her family. I don't want you to negotiate finances. I want you to listen, to observe, to build a bridge where we have only found walls." "And if I succeed?" Clara asked. "If you help us secure this deal," Alistair said, "I will create a position for you at this company, Director of Cultural Integration for our European acquisitions. You will have a new life, a salary that will solve any family debt you might have, and a career that utilizes your actual talents. I will also fund the completion of your degree, should you still wish for it." It was an offer that was beyond comprehension. A lifeline, not just to solvency, but to a life she thought was lost forever. "And if I fail?" Vivian answered before Alistair could. "If you fail, Miss Vining, a car will take you back to Marignac, and you will be on the next flight back to New York. You can have your old job back at Le Clair de Lune. We will, of course, compensate you for your time." Her tone made it clear that failure was the only outcome she expected. The weight of their expectations, of the entire surreal situation, pressed down on Clara. This was insane. They were asking her to step into a corporate shark tank with nothing but a half-finished viticulture degree and her fluency in French wine culture. It was an impossible task. But then she thought of the restaurant, the condescension, the slow, grinding death of her spirit. Failure here meant returning to that. Success meant everything. She looked from Vivian's cold, challenging stare to Alistair's quiet, expectant one. She took a deep breath. "When is the meeting?" she asked. The next 2 days were a brutal, high-speed education in the world of corporate acquisitions. Clara was given an office in Vance Global Ventures' Parisian headquarters, a space with a panoramic view of the Seine and the Eiffel Tower, a view that was probably worth more than she had earned in her entire life. She was buried under an avalanche of files, financial reports, market analyses, legal documents, and, most importantly, a thick dossier on Madame Geneviève de Vigny and her family. She devoured every page. She learned that Madame de Vigny was 85 years old, a widow, and had run the estate with an iron fist for 50 years. She was a legend in the wine world, a purist who despised modern agricultural techniques and corporate interference. The dossier was filled with failed attempts by other companies to acquire Château de Vigny. Geneviève had dismissed them all as soulless merchants who wouldn't know a Grand Cru from grape juice. Vivienne made her disdain for the situation clear. She would periodically enter Clara's office, quiz her on obscure financial data, and point out her glaring lack of experience. "Do you even know what EBITDA means, Miss Vining?" she'd ask, a smug look on her face. "No," Clara admitted honestly, "but I know that Madame de Vigny's favorite vintage is the 1961, that she believes the soul of her vineyard resides in the specific orientation of a certain plot of Cabernet Franc, and that she sees this deal not as a financial transaction, but as the potential desecration of her family's land and legacy. Perhaps that is more important than earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization." The response left Vivian momentarily speechless, which gave Clara a small surge of confidence. She knew she couldn't compete on their turf. She couldn't talk finance or law, but she could understand people. She could understand culture, history, and the profound, almost spiritual connection between a vintner and their land. That had to be her strength. The day of the meeting arrived. Clara was a bundle of nerves. A stylist, summoned by Alistair, had provided her with a simple, elegant forest green dress by a discreet French designer in low, comfortable heels. Understated, respectful, earthy, the stylist had advised. The meeting was to be held at Château de Vigny itself, in the ancient salon overlooking the rows of vines, a hallowed space that felt more like a living museum than a conference room. As their car pulled up the long, cypress-lined drive, Clara could see a small army of lawyers and executives from Vance Global Ventures waiting on the gravel path, all looking tense. Alistair, Vivian, and Clara got out of the car. Alistair gave Clara a reassuring nod. "Remember, you are not here to speak for me. You are here to listen for me." Vivian simply sniffed. "Try not to spill anything." They entered the building. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp earth, old stone, and faint traces of fermenting grapes. They were led into a formal salon on the ground floor, and there, sitting in a worn velvet armchair by a grand fireplace, was Madame Geneviève de Vigne. She was a small, almost bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that sparkled with fierce pride and perfectly coiffed silver hair. She was flanked by her two sons, both stern-faced men in their 60s, their hands gnarled from a lifetime of working the land. Introductions were made. When Clara was introduced as part of our cultural liaison team, Genevieve's eyes lingered on her for a moment, a flicker of intense curiosity in their depths. The meeting began, and it was a disaster. Vivian, taking the lead, launched into a slick presentation filled with charts and projections about synergy, global market expansion, and shareholder value. She spoke with a cold, corporate precision that clearly grated on Madame de Vigne. The matriarch listened, her face an unreadable mask. After 15 minutes, she held up a delicate, age-spotted hand. "Enough, Mademoiselle Vance," she said, her voice soft but carrying immense authority, a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "I have heard these words before. They are empty numbers on a page. You talk of expanding my brand. You speak of it as if it is a chain of supermarkets. You do not understand what we do here. The terroir, the âme, the soil, the soul." Vivian's professional smile tightened. "Madame de Vigne, with all due respect, the soul of a company does not pay its employees or fund its growth in a competitive global market." It was the wrong thing to say. A chill descended upon the room, as palpable as a sudden frost on the vines. Madame de Vigne's eldest son, Etienne, spoke for the first time, his voice a low growl. "My mother finds your approach aggressive, mademoiselle. Your words are disrespectful." The meeting devolved from there. The two sides were speaking entirely different languages, just as Alistair had predicted. The Vance team talked about efficiency and profit. The de Vigne's family talked about heritage and the sacredness of the land. Clara remained silent, watching and listening. She noticed the small details. She saw how Madame de Vigne's hand rested on a particular, beautifully illustrated book about the history of Bordeaux wine beside her. She noticed the faint scent of dried lavender coming from a small sachet tucked into the armchair. She saw the painting on the wall behind Madame de Vigne. Not a famous masterpiece, but a vibrant, intimate landscape of the very vineyard they sat in, painted in a rustic, almost impressionistic style. It had the soft, earthy colors and detailed depiction of flora and fauna, typical of local artists who truly understood the land. It depicted the specific, unique ecosystem of Chateau de Vigne. As the meeting was about to end in a complete stalemate, Clara felt a desperate urge to do something. This was her one shot. Alistair caught her eye, and she saw the question in his gaze. He gave her the slightest of nods. "Permission." "Madame de Vigne," Clara said, her voice quiet but clear, speaking in French. The entire room turned to look at her. "Pardonnez mon interruption." "Forgive my interruption." She stood up and walked not toward the negotiating table, but toward the painting on the wall. "This is a truly magnificent piece," she said, her Bordeaux accent, so different from the formal, textbook French of the translators, seeming to warm the air. The way the artist has captured the specific light of the Medoc, the texture of the soil. It's not just a painting of a vineyard, is it? It's a portrait of a living ecosystem. The oak trees along the river, the wild herbs growing between the rows. This must be from your own estate, no? Geneviève de Vigne's austere expression softened for the first time. She looked genuinely surprised and intrigued. "You have a good eye, mademoiselle," she said, a note of wonder in her voice. "That is a portrait of this very vineyard, painted by a local artist, a friend of my father's. It shows the unique biodiversity we have cultivated for centuries. It is indeed my most treasured possession, for it captures the very essence of Chateau de Vigne." "She is reading the land," Clara observed, looking closer at the details in the painting. "It's unusual for a landscape to feel so personal, as if the artist was capturing not just a view, but a profound understanding. It tells the story of the terroir." "It does," Madame de Vigne said, a note of pride in her voice. "It shows why our land is special, why our wines are unique. Each vine has a story. Each season adds a new chapter." Vivian was staring at Clara, her mouth slightly open, a look of utter disbelief on her face. The lawyers were shuffling their papers, confused by this sudden turn in conversation. Clara turned from the painting to face Madame Devine. Mr. Vance's company is built on technology and data. It is a world of numbers. But he understands that a legacy like yours is not built on numbers. It is built on vision, the vision of a family like yours, who sees beyond the harvest to the soul of the land. She gestured to the portrait. He does not want to erase that vision. He wants to give it a new voice, to share the story of this land, this terroir, with a world that perhaps has forgotten how to truly listen. A company without a soul is just a machine. You are the soul of Chateau de Vigne. He is not here to buy a machine. He is here to protect a work of art. She had used the word art. She had connected the present to the past, the numbers to the narrative. She had shown that she saw not just a brand, but a story, a living legacy. Silence filled the room. Geneviève de Vigne stared at Clara, her sharp eyes searching. Then she slowly turned her gaze to Alistair Vance. Your father was a craftsman, was he not? A builder of bespoke instruments? She asked, her voice unexpectedly gentle. Alistair, who had remained silent, finally spoke. He was a luthier. He taught me that true value is found in precision, passion, and understanding the soul of the wood. Madame de Vigne nodded slowly. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. Perhaps we can have tea next week, and you can leave your presentation, she said, gesturing to Vivienne's laptop, at your office. Just you and me. And, she added, her eyes finding Clara's, you will bring Mademoiselle Vining. The walk back to the car was surreal. The Vance executives were buzzing with excitement, clapping Alistair on the back. For the first time in months, they had made progress. They had a second meeting. Vivienne was silent, her expression a thunderous mix of shock and resentment. As they got into the car, she finally turned to Clara. That was a lucky trick, she said, her voice low and sharp. A parlor game with an old painting. It wasn't a trick, Vivienne, Alistair said, his voice firm. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, she saw open admiration in his eyes. It was insight. She listened. Something your team of experts failed to do. She found the foundation. Vivienne said nothing more for the rest of the ride, simply staring out the window, defeated. The tea with Madame de Vigne the following week was a resounding success. Without the lawyers and presentations, the conversation flowed easily. Clara acted as the bridge, just as Alistair had hoped. She would translate not just their words, but their intent. When Alistair spoke of platforms and digital ecosystems, Clara would rephrase it to Madame de Vigne as creating a digital atelier where the stories of the artisans and the unique narrative of the land could be shared with the world. They talked for hours, not about money, but about terroir, art history, family legacy, and the future of French wine. By the end of the week, the deal was signed. Chateau de Vigne was now part of Vance Global Ventures, but with contractual guarantees protecting its heritage, its biodynamic practices, and with Geneviève de Vignes herself appointed to a lifetime seat on the board as a brand guardian and viticultural steward. The night the deal was finalized, Alistair hosted a small celebration at his Bastide. Clara stood on the balcony of her room, the same one she had woken up in just over a week ago, looking out at the endless rows of vines shimmering under the moonlight. She felt like a completely different person from the weary sommelier who had stepped off that plane. Alistair came to stand beside her. For a few moments, they stood in comfortable silence. I owe you a great deal, Clara, he said finally. You gave me an opportunity, she replied. That's more than anyone else ever has. The offer I made is on the table, he said, turning to face her. Director of Cultural Integration, a very generous salary, a housing allowance here in Bordeaux, and a blank check for your education. It's yours, no interview required. This was it, the culmination of the impossible dream, a new life handed to her on a silver platter. But something had shifted in her over the past week. She had not just been acting as a bridge for him, she had been rebuilding a bridge to her own forgotten self. Thank you, she said, her heart pounding. It's an incredible offer, but I have a counter-proposal. Alistair raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. I'm listening. I don't want the job as a gift, she said, and I don't want you to pay for my degree. I want you to invest in me, not as an employee you discovered, but as a partner you value. She took a breath, summoning all the confidence she had gained. I want to run the Chateau de Vigne integration, not as a director of a department, but as the project lead. Give me a budget and a team, and I want a performance-based contract. If I succeed in doubling its global prestige and expanding its limited production sustainably within 3 years, while maintaining its unique terroir and heritage, I get a stake in the subsidiary, a small one, but a real one, and I'll pay for my own degree with the salary you give me. She was asking for responsibility, not a reward. She was asking for a chance to build something herself, not just be a well-paid accessory to his empire. Alistair Vance stared at her, his analytical gaze replaced by one of genuine surprise, which slowly morphed into a broad, brilliant smile. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face, making him seem younger, more vibrant. A college dropout sommelier who served me water a week ago is now negotiating equity with me on a multi-billion-dollar deal, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He let out a soft laugh. I knew my instincts were right about you, Clara Vining. I just had no idea how right. He extended his hand. You have a deal. Welcome to Vance Global Ventures. Clara shook his hand, a current of electricity passing between them. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a contract. It was the closing of one chapter of her life and the explosive beginning of another. She was no longer a sommelier who spoke French. She was a woman who had found her voice and her vineyard in more ways than one, and she was finally truly home. Clara's story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that the person you are right now, in whatever job you're working, is not the final chapter. Your hidden talents, your forgotten passions, the skills you think no one sees, they have immense value. It was a single moment of kindness and a sentence in French that changed Clara's life. But it was her courage to step onto that jet, her intelligence to see the real problem, and her confidence to demand her true worth that secured her future. What hidden talent do you have that the world just hasn't seen yet? What would you have done if you found that black envelope? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an incredible journey. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their big break might be just one customer, one conversation, or one moment of courage away. Thank you for listening.